I couldn't believe it when my parents handed me the keys to that old, beaten-up car. The kind you'd see in a junkyard, barely able to start without sputtering. My sister, on the other hand, was handed the keys to a luxury car collection, brand new, shiny, and untouched. The contrast between us couldn't have been more stark, but my parents just laughed it off. "At least you have wheels," they joked, grinning as if they'd done something wonderful for me. It stung, but I didn't say anything. I knew they had always favored Jenna, but I never imagined it would go this far. The car, though, had a strange allure. It looked like a piece of garbage, but when I drove it, there was something different about it. It felt like it had its own energy, like it had been through something big, something that I couldn't quite put my finger on. It was when I tried to fix the damn thing that I found the first clue. I was under the hood one afternoon, struggling to figure out what was wrong, when I noticed a strange engraving on the underside of the engine. It wasn't just any number or logo, it was a set of coordinates. Why would anyone put coordinates on a broken car? My heart raced. Could it be that this old wreck had some hidden history? I had to find out. Without telling anyone, I followed the coordinates, driving the car to the location it led me to. It was an old, abandoned warehouse on the edge of town. It looked like a place where secrets could easily be buried. I parked the car, the engine still shaking as I killed it. I didn't know why I felt so drawn to the place, but I couldn't stop myself. I walked inside, and that's when I found it. There was a stash of documents, old, weathered, but clearly important. They were hidden behind some crates, tucked away like someone had desperately tried to hide them. I picked up the first folder and opened it. Inside were names, dates, and photographs of people I didn't recognize. But what caught my attention was the mention of a car, my car. It was a part of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. I took the documents back home, my mind racing. I didn't know what to do with them, but I knew that the broken car wasn't as simple as it seemed. It was a key, something my parents had clearly overlooked. That night, I confronted them. I had to know what they'd hidden from me. They were furious when they saw the documents. My mother tried to act calm, but I could see her hands trembling. My father, he didn't say anything. He just stared at the floor. Eventually, the truth came out. The car wasn't just a junker, it was linked to a family secret, one that had been buried for years. My parents had been involved in something illegal years ago, something connected to stolen assets and shady business deals. That car, that broken car, had been a part of it all. I wasn't just given a junk car. I had been handed the key to unraveling a story my parents thought was long buried. I don't know if they regretted it, but I sure as hell wasn't about to let them control this anymore. I'm not the person they thought I was, and now I have the power to prove it. They can't take that away from me. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about the documents and what they meant for me, for my family. I felt like I had opened a door that should have stayed closed, and now there was no going back. My parents tried to keep me away from it, but I couldn't let it go. I dug deeper into the files, cross-referencing the names and dates. Everything was linked to shady dealings, but there was one name that kept appearing, a man named Vincent Kincaid. I Googled him. The results weren't pretty. Kincaid was known for being involved in some of the biggest underground operations in the region. Drug trafficking, weapons, and even human trafficking. He was a ghost, no one had seen him in years. But my parents were connected to him somehow. I had to know what happened between them. Why did they distance themselves from him? And why did they leave me with the car? What was I supposed to do with it now? A week later, I found myself standing outside a rundown bar, the address from the documents leading me here. It wasn't far from where I'd grown up, but I'd never noticed it before. The sign was rusted, barely hanging on its hinges, but the sound of muffled voices from inside told me it was still alive. This was the last place I wanted to go, but I had no choice. I needed answers. I walked in, the bell over the door ringing loudly as I stepped inside. The room went quiet for a moment, the low hum of conversation stopping as people turned to look at me. I didn't know what to expect, but I didn't expect to see Vincent Kincaid sitting at the bar, looking right at me. He wasn't what I imagined. He wasn't some intimidating figure with scars or tattoos. He was just a man, mid-40s, graying hair, wearing a simple leather jacket. But his eyes, they were cold, calculating, and they studied me like he already knew everything about me. "Looking for something?" he asked, his voice smooth but with an edge that made the hairs on my neck stand up. I didn't know how to respond, but I had to say something. "I need to know what happened between you and my parents." His lips curled into a smirk. "Your parents, huh? They've been hiding a lot of things from you, haven't they?" I nodded, swallowing hard. "What is it? What do they owe you?" Kincaid took a long drink from his glass, then leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the side of the bar. "Your parents were part of a deal. They wanted out, but when you're in with people like me, you don't just walk away. There's always a price." I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. This wasn't just about a broken car anymore, it was about something much bigger. Something dangerous. "They used you," Kincaid continued, his voice now low and almost comforting. "They gave you that car, didn't they? Told you it was just a junker? The truth is, it was a message. A way for them to keep an eye on you without you knowing." I shook my head in disbelief. "What do you mean? What's the car got to do with any of this?" He smiled, leaning in closer. "The car is more than a vehicle. It's a tracker, kid. They've been watching you, making sure you don't find out too much. But I think you're getting close, aren't you?" My mind raced as I processed his words. The car had been watching me? My own parents had been spying on me, even after everything that had happened? My stomach churned, and I wanted to yell, to storm out of the bar and confront them, but something in me held back. There was more to this. I knew it. "I'm going to find out everything," I said, my voice steady but full of fury. "And when I do, I'm not going to let them get away with it." Kincaid looked at me for a moment, sizing me up. Then, without warning, he slid a folded piece of paper across the bar to me. "Here's what you need to know. You'll regret it if you don't take it. But don't say I didn't warn you," he said, his voice turning cold again. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed the paper and walked out of the bar, the weight of it in my hand heavier than I could have imagined. The secrets were out. There was no turning back now. I didn't open the paper until I was in the car, sitting in the driver's seat with the engine running. The cool night air poured in through the cracked windows, but I barely noticed. I had to know what was on that piece of paper. Slowly, I unfolded it, my hands trembling as I read the scrawled message. "Meet me at the old mill. Tomorrow night. 9 p.m. Don't bring anyone." The paper was unsigned, but the words were clear. It was a message from someone connected to all of this. Someone who knew everything I was trying to piece together. But who could it be? And why the mill? I'd heard rumors about that place, everyone in town had. It was abandoned, a relic of the past, a site where strange things had happened years ago. People talked about it in whispers, but no one went near it anymore. I didn't have a choice. I had to go. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized just how dangerous this was. My parents' secret life, the broken car, the cryptic message, it was all leading to something much darker than I could have imagined. The next night, I found myself standing in front of the mill, the air thick with the smell of rotting wood and rust. The place looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The moon barely pierced the thick clouds above, casting long shadows across the grounds. I pulled the car up to the side, trying to stay out of view, and cut the engine. The silence was deafening. I stepped out and walked cautiously toward the mill's entrance, every step echoing through the empty space. The door creaked as I pushed it open, revealing a dark hallway. I hesitated, but only for a moment. I couldn't stop now. I walked deeper into the mill, my pulse quickening with each step. I reached the central room, where old machinery lay scattered around. The floor was covered in dust, and the air was thick with a sense of abandonment. And then I saw him. Vincent Kincaid was standing by a rusted conveyor belt, his hands in his pockets, watching me as if he'd been expecting me all along. "Thought you might show up," he said, his voice echoing through the vast, empty space. "Your parents never knew what they were getting into when they made that deal. They thought they could walk away, but they couldn't." I wasn't sure what to say, but I couldn't hold back the question that had been burning in my mind. "What is this all about? What do you want with me?" He chuckled, low and dark. "It's not what I want with you, kid. It's what your parents wanted with you. They wanted to protect you, keep you in the dark. But the truth is, you're the one who's going to finish what they started." I stepped forward, my heart pounding in my chest. "Finish what?" "The deal." Kincaid's smile was slow, deliberate. "You think this was just about the car? About some stolen assets?" "No. This goes deeper. Your parents were pawns in a much bigger game. But you've got something they don't. You've got the key." I swallowed, my mind racing. The key? What was he talking about? "You see," Kincaid continued, "there's more to that car than anyone realized. Your parents made sure to hide the truth from you, but they couldn't keep the past buried forever. Now it's your turn to finish what they couldn't, because I know the truth. The car's not just a tracker, it's a map. A map that leads to something worth millions. And you're going to help me find it." I shook my head, trying to understand, but the pieces weren't fitting together. "You're insane. I'm not helping you with anything." He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You don't have a choice. You're already involved. That car you're driving, it's got the location of everything. It's the only thing that connects all the dots. You'll help me, whether you want to or not." I backed up, suddenly terrified. "You're lying." Kincaid laughed softly, shaking his head. "I'm not lying, kid. You'll see soon enough. Your parents didn't want you to know, but I'm giving you a chance to make it right. You can't run from this. You never could." The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. This wasn't just about my parents' past, it was about my future. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, I was already tangled in their mess. He turned and motioned toward the far corner of the mill, where a large metal door stood, slightly ajar. "Come on, let's go. Time to finish this." I knew I couldn't back out now. Whether I liked it or not, this was my fight now. But I had no idea what I was walking into. All I knew was that I couldn't trust Kincaid, and I had to find a way to stop whatever he was planning. The pieces were falling into place, and soon, I'd have to decide what kind of person I was going to be in all of this. I followed Kincaid as he led me toward the metal door, the screeching of rusted hinges echoing in the dead silence of the mill. My heart was pounding so loudly I thought he could hear it. There was something unnerving about the way he moved, like he had all the answers and was simply waiting for me to catch up. But I wasn't sure I even wanted the answers anymore. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice shaky. Kincaid didn't answer at first. He just continued down the narrow hallway beyond the door, the dim light from the broken windows casting strange shadows on the walls. The further we went, the more it felt like we were descending into something dark, something I couldn't escape. Finally, he stopped in front of another door, this one locked with a heavy chain. He turned to me, his smile cold. "This is it. The heart of it all." I stood still, trying to swallow the lump in my throat. There was no turning back now. I had come this far. But something told me I wasn't going to like what I found inside. Kincaid pulled a key from his jacket pocket, a small, silver thing that gleamed in the dim light, and unlocked the chain. The door creaked open, revealing a room unlike anything I expected. It wasn't filled with machinery or old crates like the rest of the mill. No, this room was pristine, almost clinical. White walls, bright lights, and a large wooden table in the center. On the table were several items, old, faded maps, stacks of papers, and a heavy metal box. My eyes immediately went to the box. It was old, but it looked important. It had a strange emblem engraved into its surface, something I hadn't seen before. It looked like a crest, but I couldn't make out the details from where I stood. Kincaid walked over to the table, his movements deliberate. He lifted the box, placed it in front of me, and opened it. Inside, I saw a stack of old documents, and beneath them, a photograph. The photo was faded, but I could make out two figures standing side by side, my parents, much younger, in front of a mansion I didn't recognize. It was clear from the way they were standing that they weren't just a couple, they were part of something much bigger. There was something in their eyes, an intensity, a secret that I had never seen before. "What is this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Kincaid leaned over the table, his eyes gleaming in the light. "Your parents were involved in a lot more than just shady business. They were part of an underground network, a secret society. This," he gestured to the box, "is the key to everything. The deal they made, the one they thought they could walk away from, was just the beginning. You're holding the final piece." I stepped back, my mind racing. "What do you mean, the final piece? What deal?" He smiled, a dark, knowing smile. "They were trying to destroy the network from the inside, but they couldn't do it alone. They needed someone who could break it all down, piece by piece. They thought you were safe, that they could shield you from the truth. But you found it, didn't you? The car, the coordinates. It led you here. Now, it's your turn." I shook my head, trying to make sense of the madness. "No. I'm not part of this. I don't want anything to do with it." Kincaid's smile faded, and his tone turned serious. "You don't have a choice. This is bigger than you. Bigger than your parents. It's a system, a web of connections and power. They were just pawns in it, but you? You're the one who can bring it all down. But first, you have to choose, will you take the power that's rightfully yours, or will you let it slip through your fingers?" I stood there, staring at the box, at the photograph of my parents, who I now realized were not the people I thought they were. They had kept so much from me, buried so many secrets, and now it felt like I was staring down the same path they had walked. "I'm not a part of your plan," I said, but the words felt hollow. Even as I said them, I felt the weight of the truth press down on me. Kincaid didn't move. He just watched me, waiting. "Then you'll continue to be a pawn. Just like they were. But remember this, once you walk away, you'll never be able to unsee what you've learned. The game has already started." I wanted to walk out. I wanted to leave, forget everything, and try to go back to my old life. But deep down, I knew that wasn't possible. The truth was out, and no matter how much I wanted to ignore it, I was already tangled up in this mess. "I'm not joining you," I said, a little more firmly this time. Kincaid's gaze hardened, but then, unexpectedly, he nodded. "You're stronger than I thought." "That's good. But know this, you can't erase the past. Not now. And you're not the only one who's searching for answers." With that, he turned and walked toward the door, leaving me standing in the middle of the room, my mind a whirlwind of thoughts. I was in too deep. There was no going back now. Whatever was coming next, I had no idea what it would be. But I couldn't ignore the feeling that I was about to uncover something much bigger than just my parents' secrets. The game was on. The next few days felt like a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even though I was trying my best to stay under the radar. Every time I looked over my shoulder, every time I went out, there was an unsettling sense that something was closing in on me. Kincaid's words echoed in my mind, "Asterisk, you can't erase the past. Asterisk, I didn't know what he meant exactly, but I had a sinking feeling I was about to find out. I couldn't go back to my parents, not now. They were hiding something bigger than I could imagine, and I couldn't trust them anymore. I had to keep digging. I went to the mill again, hoping to find something I missed the first time. The car felt different now, as though it had a purpose beyond simply being a vehicle. I drove to the same spot where Kincaid had taken me, hoping there might be another clue, something hidden in plain sight. When I arrived, the old mill was quieter than I remembered. The place had always been eerie, but today it felt like the calm before a storm. I parked the car and got out, scanning the area. The door to the room where I'd found the box was still open, but no one was inside. I stepped through the doorway, my breath shallow, and walked toward the table. The box was gone, but there were new papers scattered across it, maps, more names, more coordinates. One of the papers caught my eye. It was a map, but not just any map. It was a detailed blueprint of an underground facility, something I knew I had seen before but couldn't place. It looked familiar, but it wasn't until I saw the label on the bottom that everything clicked. The Westbridge facility, my heart skipped a beat. The Westbridge facility wasn't just a name, it was a secret research center, one my parents had told me about once, years ago, in passing. It was supposed to be abandoned, shut down after a fire. But this map showed something different. It showed that the facility wasn't just abandoned, it was still active. And someone had been using it. The next part was a no-brainer. I had to go there. But I knew it wouldn't be easy. If Kincaid knew about it, others did too, and I couldn't trust anyone anymore. Not even the authorities. I had to go alone, or risk getting caught up in something bigger than I could control. That night, I drove to the Westbridge facility. The drive was long, quiet, and I kept checking the rearview mirror, feeling that same gnawing sense of dread. When I finally reached the facility, I parked a good distance away and walked toward the back entrance. The place was deserted, as if it had been for years. But the lights inside told a different story. There were people in there. I crept around the building, looking for any sign of an entrance. Finally, I found a small access door at the side. It was locked, but I managed to break in without much effort. The moment I stepped inside, the air felt thick, oppressive, and I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I moved quietly, staying in the shadows, until I reached a large central chamber. There, in the middle of the room, was a set of large steel doors. The kind of doors you didn't just find anywhere. I approached cautiously, my hands shaking as I reached for the handle. The door creaked open, and the first thing that hit me was the smell, like metal, chemicals, and something decayed. I took a step inside, and my eyes immediately went to the rows of machinery lined up against the walls. Some of them looked familiar, equipment I had seen in the documents at the mill. It was clear now. This wasn't just a research facility, it was something darker. Suddenly, I heard footsteps. The hairs on the back of my neck stood on end, and I froze, holding my breath. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was Kincaid. "I knew you'd come," he said, his voice as calm as ever. "You're too curious for your own good." I didn't move, didn't speak, but I was ready to bolt if I had to. My heart was pounding in my chest. "What is this place?" I managed to ask. Kincaid stepped further into the room, his eyes scanning the machines. "This, kid, is where everything started. Where your parents started. This is where they thought they could control the game. But they couldn't. And now, you're here, trying to finish what they couldn't." I backed up slowly, my mind racing. "No. I'm not finishing anything for you." He laughed softly. "You don't get it, do you? You're already part of this. The moment you found the car, the moment you started asking questions, you became a player. There's no going back." I shook my head, fighting the panic that was creeping in. "I'm not working for you. I'm not part of this." Kincaid's smile faded, and for the first time, I saw something dangerous in his eyes. You already are. The facility, the car, your parents, they were all just pieces of a much larger puzzle. And now, you're the last piece. You're the key to unlocking everything. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I couldn't let him see how much he was scaring me. I don't want any part of your game. Whatever you're doing here, it ends now. Kincaid tilted his head, studying me for a moment before slowly, almost sadly, shaking his head. You're too late for that. You should have known, kid. The past can't be erased, and neither can the choices you make now. You're already in too deep. Before I could respond, I heard the sound of approaching footsteps from behind him. I wasn't alone anymore. And neither was Kincaid. Looks like we're not the only ones here, I said, my voice tight, realizing too late that I had walked right into a trap. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer, and suddenly, the room was filled with people. They appeared from the shadows, emerging from hidden doors I hadn't noticed, their faces hidden behind dark masks. I counted at least 5 of them. My heart raced as I tried to make sense of the situation. Kincaid wasn't alone. And it was clear now that this wasn't just some underground operation. This was a well-organized, dangerous network. One of the masked figures stepped forward, a tall man with a cold, calculating gaze. You should have stayed away, he said, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. He glanced at Kincaid, then back at me. But now that you're here, well, you're part of this. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. This was it. I was in too deep to turn back now. Kincaid's smile returned, but it was colder than before, as if he'd expected this all along. I told you, Kincaid said, his voice calm. Once you started asking questions, there was no going back. I wasn't about to let them think they had me trapped. The tension in the air was thick, but I knew I couldn't just stand there and wait for whatever they had planned. I scanned the room, my eyes darting from one person to the next. I had to find a way out, and fast. I noticed a control panel near the far wall. It looked like it controlled the security systems, maybe even the doors. I didn't have much time to think, but I made a snap decision. In one swift motion, I bolted toward the control panel, not waiting to see if they'd react. I heard Kincaid yell behind me, but I didn't stop. I had to disable whatever was keeping me locked in here. My fingers fumbled over the buttons, but I finally hit the right combination. The doors to the room began to open. Without thinking, I ran, sprinting as fast as I could. The masked figures were close behind me, but I could hear their footsteps faltering, unsure of what to do next. I could feel Kincaid's presence, his rage closing in, but I didn't look back. I ran, knowing this might be my only shot at escaping. The building seemed to stretch on forever, but I finally burst out through the back door and into the open. The cold night air hit me, and I barely hesitated before jumping into the car. My hands were shaking as I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered to life, and I floored the gas pedal, taking off into the night, not daring to look in the rearview mirror. I didn't stop until I reached the safety of my apartment. Even then, I didn't feel safe. I locked every door, every window, and sat in the dark, trying to collect my thoughts. But nothing made sense. Kincaid's words echoed in my mind, *, you're the key. *, the truth was, I wasn't sure who was playing whom anymore. The deeper I dug, the more tangled I became in a web of secrets, lies, and power I didn't fully understand. My parents had kept me in the dark for so long, but now, the truth was all I had. I was the key. But to what? And who else was hunting for it? As the hours passed, I realized there was no way out of this. Not without confronting whatever Kincaid and his network were after. But one thing was certain, I wasn't going to let them control me. I would find the answers, and I would use whatever power I had to bring it all down. The past couldn't be erased, but I could change the future. And no matter how deep the conspiracy went, no matter how many people were involved, I would be the one to decide how it ended. This was just the beginning.